Hey, Federico, how's it going?
I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm freezing. I'm really freezing because, I don't know if people know this, but my studio is in the basement of my home, and that's great. Well, it's not great. I'll tell you why it's not great. It's not
Mm.
great because when it's super cold like it is today, it's minus 15 Celsius, about 4
Oh
degrees,
God. Oh
4
no.
degrees Fahrenheit outside. And because I'm in the basement, it's relatively cold down here. And when we record, I turn the temperature, I turn the furnace down colder so that the furnace, which is in the next room from where I record, isn't blowing air throughout the house, which is kind of
Mm.
noisy and would ruin the recording. So instead, I just bundle up before we record and hope that no one else in my family will notice while I have the temperature turned down. But you know, we should get started with the show instead of talking about the terrible winter weather in Chicago. I want to first thank, of course, our sponsor for this episode of App Stories, and that is Fitbod. Today, we are going to talk about apps that are everything but the text editor. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk to you about what's new because I've been doing more experiments. This is something I do every winter.
Hmm.
And what I did last Saturday is I downloaded Descript, which is an audio editor for
Ah,
podcasts.
okay.
And I wanted to check it out because I've heard a lot of hype about it, right? And it's a really there's a really wow feature about Descript. And the wow feature is once you import your audio, first of all, what you could do is I could import your track and my track, and it matches them up automatically, which is kind of nice
Okay.
instead of doing that manually. And then it transcribes it into text. And what's neat about that is not necessarily just the transcription, because there are lots of services that do that, but it ties the transcription to the audio file so that you can hit a play button and it highlights the words as they're spoken and as you're listening to them. And what you can do then is you can highlight a sentence, a word, whatever it is, delete it, and it deletes it from the audio track too. It's pretty neat.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, it's pretty neat. But here's the thing, it has been hyped probably more than I think is justified, only because I know, like, for instance, Jason Snell used this app for all the interviews he did in his 20 Max podcast. And it works really, really well for something like that because what he was doing was pulling out snippets of conversations of just one person's audio. What
Hmm.
gets more difficult is trying to edit something like you and I having this conversation where you might say, oh, huh, wow, or right, that kind of thing
Hmm.
in between over my track, or we just maybe interrupt each other, which we do once in a while. And it doesn't handle that well. It gets all confused. And then you have to drop back down to what you would traditionally do in something like Logic, which is editing the waveform itself and separating out the crosstalk and all of
Right.
that. And it also has other features, like you could take out automatically all the ums and ahs and likes and things like that. But the edits tend to be not super natural depending on how people use those filler words. So at the end of the day, it's a relatively expensive service. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, this might be an interesting way to both edit this show and others and get a transcript at the same time. At the end of the day, I decided it wasn't really
Hmm.
worth the effort, but it is an interesting product and one that's worth keeping an eye on. And it does work super well for certain types of audio editing, like Jason was doing. So I'm going to keep it in mind for something we do later, maybe with an interview or something like that. But I think as I know Jason had said in a story that he did back in September on Six Colors, it doesn't really work as well for conversational podcasts. So that's what I've been up to.
Interesting. Well, the idea of deleting something in the text editor and it goes away from the audio part as well. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty cool, and it makes for a great demo. I'm interested too. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from listeners how into transcripts they are. I wonder whether having a separate written transcript, how many people
Hmm.
would actually use that sort of thing. I know I would like it for my own personal, like a library of our past shows, just to be able to find things you or I said months ago, but I haven't ever really myself gone and sought out a transcript of any of the other shows that I listen to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I've always thought that transcripts, like, they are an incredible tool for accessibility, like
right.
for people who cannot actually listen to a podcast. I think it makes a lot of sense, obviously, to have a transcript.
Right.
But for everyone else, like for other listeners, I think it's more of what I think it's one of those things that people like to think that they want it without actually having a use case for it, like a checklist item. Oh, okay, you have transcripts, great, but we're never going to use them.
All right.
So I'm curious to hear if anybody who doesn't need them for accessibility purposes actually has a need for transcripts. I guess the only aspect I can think about is having an archive that is fully searchable. Like that, I
Right.
understand as a benefit. Having an archive of all the things that we say, for example, on app stories. And so if you remember me saying a particular expression or a particular, mentioning a particular app or
Mm-hmm.
video game, for example, you can go into the archive and search for it. And that I understand. But like, is that something that you do often? Is that something that you find yourself doing on a daily basis? And where's the difference between searching the archive and say searching the show notes, for example, in your favorite podcast client, like something like Overcast, for example, lets you search show notes. And
Mm-hmm.
usually the things that we mention are already mentioned in the show notes. So it makes a lot of sense to search those, right? So I'm keen to hear what the listeners think about transcripts and what kind of use case you have for them, if you have it.
Yeah, I think a lot of other shows at some organizations like NPR do it.
Right.
And I think one reason they do is because then they have the text to use in other forms of content. So, you could pull out a quote from somebody you interviewed and drop it into an article about that interview
Mhm.
that's maybe different than the podcast, but it makes it easy to drop that in there. And I don't know that that's really the kind of thing that we have internal use for so much, but it is interesting. Would be curious to hear if anybody feels like they have a need for that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Fitbod. Fitbod is the fitness app that provides a personalized exercise plan, a fitness plan that actually fits you. When it comes to fitness, Fitbod believes everyone can be better. Whether you're working out 3 days a week or twice a day, Fitbod's algorithm uses data and analytics to help you build on your previous workout so that your next workout is scientifically proven to be better than the last. Fitbod has been fine-tuned by certified personal trainers to bring the best practices of strength training to you. Your workout program is tailored exactly to fit your needs, making it perfectly suited to your unique body, experience, environment, and goals. It can be hard to know exactly how much you should be doing while exercising, but Fitbod figures that out so you don't have to worry about under or overtraining. Fitbod will also mix up muscle groups, exercises, sets, reps, and weights over time to keep you on top form. You don't need to spend hours researching the best exercises and workout strategies to get results. Fitbod does all of that for you. If you're working out at home right now, Fitbod has a bunch of body weight only workouts. These are great for indoors or outdoors. But if you're back at the gym, they have tons of great workout options there too. They have everything you're going to need, no matter how much equipment you have access to. Fitbod is there to help you with any exercise routine you need. I love that it's available to me wherever I am, with any equipment I have available. This has been something super useful to me over the last year, as what I have available to me has changed dramatically. Whether I have access to a gym or just some weights, or even just resistance bands at home, Fitbod is there to give me the recommendations and workouts I want. What I like most about Fitbod is how carefully tailored the workouts are to your experience, goals, and equipment. With just a handful of upfront onboarding questions, you're up and running in no time with a program designed to meet your needs. It's super easy, and the workouts it generates are challenging without being too difficult. On top of that, there's great videos to guide you when you want them, and even terrific Apple Watch integration. Fitbod is available on iOS and Android, and you can get started right now by going to fitbod.me/appstories, and you'll also get 25% off on your membership. Again, that URL is fitbod.me/appstories to try out Fitbod for free and get 25% off your Fitbod membership. Our thanks to Fitbod for their support of the show. Federico, why don't we move on to the topic? And I was thinking about this the other day because we've talked a lot about the text editors that we've used over the years,
Hmm.
but we don't talk probably quite as much about all the apps that surround the text editor, all the things that we use in the writing process that aren't the main text editor. And so I thought we'd talk about that today. I mean, we have talked, I know, a lot about Craft lately because it's an app that both of us are using,
Right.
and we're using it for a wide variety of things, getting ready for these shows, doing research for articles that we write, planning projects for Mac stories. There's a lot
Yeah.
going on there. And I'm curious, I mean, we don't have to get into the details of Craft since we've covered it, but I'm curious how you're using it for the stories that you write on the site.
Mm. Well, I use Craft in all kinds of different ways. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's becoming a huge part of how we manage our internal projects and documentation at Mac Stories. For personal usage, it's been an evolution, I think, over the past couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, I just wanted to use it as a note-taking app. Basically, it means like I have a folder, right? And I have, for example, a note called Shortcuts Ideas. And it's a note where I save all kinds of ideas for shortcuts that I want to build. And eventually, like I save like a couple of lines of text for, for each idea. And then
Uh-huh.
if that idea starts becoming, longer and longer, it means that I have a lot of details in my head, and it means it's actually something that I need to build. And so I go into shortcuts and I build it, and then maybe I write an article or I write a column for Mac Stories Weekly. Like it's a very organic process going from a
Mm-hmm.
single idea to a longer outline to actually building the shortcut and writing about it. So originally I thought I'm just going to be using Craft as an Apple Notes replacement, because that's exactly what I used to do in Apple Notes, saving little bits of ideas that would then become longer. And the moment they became longer, it meant, okay, these either has to be programmed in shortcuts or it's an article that I need to write in my text editor. But now the thing about Craft is that it's got that, fluid and sort of dynamic writing environment that sort of allows you to go beyond the simple act of note taking. And I think a big part of this for me is the ability to create sub pages and to create connections between different notes.
Right.
And what I've noticed about myself lately is that not only do I tend to write longer and longer notes in Craft, but on a few occasions, I'll admit it, John, I have written entire articles and newsletter columns in Craft before moving them to IA Writer for proper markdown editing.
I know you have, and I'm still a little shocked by that. I don't know what it is that bothers me about it. I suppose it's just the notion that
No, it
I
bothers me as well, actually.
okay, because there's something about wanting to have just complete control over the text in a very
Yeah.
plain text scrolling way that I like in a text editor, and that is not how Craft works. And I find that fine for research and notes and the planning kind of things we do, but I don't like it for longer form writing. And I've been using it probably closer to a notes replacement than you have for writing purposes, because I have just a big folder called research, and it's
Mm.
research for really just about everything, not just writing, but a lot of it's writing. And I'll take notes there as I use a new app and for things that I know that I'm going to write about eventually. And then, including Descript, I have notes in there about Descript. But if it's something I'm going to write, eventually that note gets moved into a writing folder. And the writing folder is a combination of research materials of things that I'm actually actively working on writing and lists of writing ideas, like, release dates for apps that are coming out, things that I want to write about but haven't yet, just that sort of thing.
Yeah, research. I do something similar. I mostly do it in a way, like I really like to, and I've always been this way, but I really like to organize my ideas before they become something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at my Craft setup right now. For example, I have an articles folder, which is where I save ideas for articles, either for the website or the newsletter. And right now I have two notes for one that is actually coming out with a monthly log issue in a few days,
Mm-hmm.
and the other for an article that I want to do on the website. But then I also do like research. For me mostly consists of, I have an idea, and either I need to save like additional context around it. Like for example, let's say I have an idea for a shortcut that I want to build. Actually, no, this is a better one. A few months ago, I needed to do a connected segment about my Sony headphones,
Right.
the wireless ones. And I needed to know a few facts about the differences in Bluetooth codecs that they were using. So I created a note in Craft, and I started, jotting down my thoughts on those headphones. Like, what are the things I like? What are the things I dislike? And then when I reached the part about Bluetooth codecs, I realized, well, I don't have enough information in my brain. Like, I don't know the facts about this
Right.
stuff. So I started Googling that information. So I put Safari and Craft in split view, started Googling. And as I went, I created like a section of the note saying, Bluetooth codecs. And I started dropping in like little, like a bullet lists of simple facts and figures to remember, dropped in a few links,
Mm-hmm.
added a few block quotes. So it became this like longer note that contained both my thoughts and the research around it. I have realized over time that to me, this sort of mixed environment where I have these notes where I build knowledge over time
Mm-hmm.
is more beneficial than just do something like, okay, here's a web page. I'm going to archive it as a PDF or a web archive, but I'm not actually, like studying the web page. Like I'm just creating a copy
Right.
of it, like an offline copy of it, but I'm not actually,
You're not digesting the
I'm not
material and kind of
digesting it
putting it in your
properly.
own words. Yeah.
And so
No.
what I did, once I was done with that connected episode, in
Mm-hmm.
Craft, I created this folder called Brain Storage.
Oh.
And everything that I've researched in the past, but that I don't need anymore, but that I still want to keep there because it's like, it's brain storage. I put
Right.
it in this folder. And so, for example, right now I have a note, CES 2021 announcements, shortcuts changes in iOS 14.3. And I have my Sony wireless headphone research. And I also have EPUBs and DRM, which, if you remember, this was a topic from a while
Oh,
back
yeah,
in
it
Mac
was.
Stories
Yeah.
Weekly. But
Right.
because I did a lot of research on this, I figured, I'm going to archive this in case someday maybe I will need this. And so I guess over the past few months, what I realized about myself is that before I get to write, I like to study the topic in a different way. In the past, I would just like create a note and then I would feel good about archiving all these different web pages from Safari and be like, okay, great. Now I have this archive. I'm not going to lose these web pages ever again. Whereas now I prioritize like actually studying and digesting the material and recreating those notes myself, because I
Right.
feel like writing something again, like you're already learning the topic as you
Right.
write.
Right. It helps you
Um,
organize your thoughts, I think,
yeah,
too. I do exactly the same thing. I mean, probably the best example recently was when I did the HomePod Mini review, and I went pretty deep in that article about thread radios. And the reason I knew as much as I did about thread radios is because I spent an awful lot of time over the holidays reading about them and going down to the level of the thread radio working group website and reading all of their specs and all sorts of details about how that all works and why it's potentially better than some of the things that are out there already. And that all those links, but also all my notes about why I thought it was important are all in that note. And I've got that and I've kept it. I like the idea, though, of kind of keeping it in a separate place because it's not something that I'm going to need right away. But I could definitely see, once there are more thread radio products on the market, that I may want to go back to that and refresh my memory a little bit about that research that I already done.
something that I also do, which I wanted to mention because we're talking about note-taking apps. I do also, and I don't do this often, but I've noticed it about myself, so I guess
Mm-hmm.
I should mention it. Sometimes when I need to jot down something very quickly, I also use Thought, the scratchpad app by the Icon Factory.
Right.
Like, it's not something that I do a lot, but like if I'm in a hurry, like it's that classic case of I'm talking to a friend and a friend mentions something and I have an idea for an article, because my brain never stops working that way.
Right.
Or like literally like I'm walking down the stairs and I have an idea for a shortcut, or I have an idea for something that I don't know, I want to write about in Mac Stories Weekly. Usually Thought is still the fastest place to save those ideas. I also, though, at the same time, I also set up like an icon launcher on the home screen for a specific note in Craft. And since the changes to custom icons in iOS 14.3, that launcher opens that note directly without taking me to shortcuts first.
Right.
And so that takes me to the dashboard note that I have in Craft in my personal workspace, which is another place where I also save ideas. So sometimes I save them in Thought, but it really doesn't happen. Like it used to happen more frequently last year. I think, especially over the past few months, since I've embraced Craft, I've started saving notes in that dashboard page that I have in Craft, which is like the dashboard note that I have in Craft is like my homepage. It's got like links to other notes and ideas for things that I want to write about, ideas for things that I like, things that I need to tell John, things that Sylvia tells me to do around the house. Like it's sort of like my personal homepage for everything. So lately I've used that more, but in the past I also used Thought.
Yeah, I like the idea of a dashboard like that links out to other things. I've got something similar, but it doesn't operate so much like a dashboard because it's really just a scratchpad. And because Craft has, because of the shortcut support as well as its extension, its share extension, both on iOS and the Mac, I drop things into there all the time, especially links. And then it's usually like on a Saturday morning or something, I'll just kind of go through and clean it up and see, why was it that I saved that? And oh yeah, this is for something I'm working on, or this is a movie I want to watch, that kind of thing, and organize it from there. I use drafts for what you use Tot for. I do not use all of the fancy features in Draft, though. I really, truly just use it as a scratchpad, kind of the way it was originally conceived back when it first came out, because it's so fast at doing that. And I don't use it a ton. I think my usage has waned a little bit too because of Craft. However, I do have occasion throughout the day when I'm working, and this is maybe getting a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but needing to just park text somewhere for a brief period of time. Maybe it's I'm gathering a link and some other information for an email or whatever it happens to be. I'll park it in drafts and then go back and get it. So it's very much just like a scratchpad for text. And because it syncs so well across all devices, it's just another way of quickly moving text from a Mac to an iPad to an iPhone. It's just very fast that way. I have a question for you, Federico.
Okay, shoot.
I know you've used DevonThink and Keep It in the past. What role do apps like those play in your writing, and how would you say, if you are using either one of them right now, how that differs from how you're using something like Craft?
I'm using Keep It right now, and at the moment I'm mostly using it for archival of PDF documents, especially for PDF copies of our newsletters. So it's basically just storage. I don't use Dropbox or iCloud Drive because Keep It has the excellent ability to search the contents of PDF documents thanks to OCR. And it's really well done in terms of tagging and smart folders and that sort of stuff. But it really doesn't play any role at the moment in my writing setup. I think right now, besides my text editor, if it's not iOS review season, which is a different topic, we can mention that if you want. I think Craft is the most important writing and it's like a hybrid, right? A note-taking, writing, research tool at the moment.
Right. Well, I do want to go to the OS review season because I know in the past when we've covered this, you have used a combination of things like DevonThink or Keep It to store PDFs that might be relevant to your review, as well as apps like Highlights to mark them up and take notes. So is that, I know we're months away from it, but is that do you see that happening again this year?
Yeah, I think I'm going to replicate my setup from last year with the addition of Craft. But basically, what I'm going to do is I am like the PDF copies, the PDF documents that I will have to highlight and annotate. I will use, again, the app called Highlights. which is a really great utility that allows you to view a side-by-side version of a PDF document and all the highlights and annotations that you take. And then I guess from there, the PDF files, I will still archive in either Keep It or Devonthink. We'll see. Devonthink has a new version coming out for iOS and iPadOS. Maybe I will switch to that again. I'm not sure at the moment. But let's say whatever I'm using, either Keep It or Devonthink, the PDF files, I will store them there for sure. The highlights that I will take from, Highlights, the app.
Right.
I think at this point I will put them in Craft instead of Apple Notes because I'm using Craft. And I think it'll be interesting to see, because of the particular structure in Craft, how I will be able to, and I think this will be really beneficial to me this year, to be able to find connections between topics, between features, and to create those backlinks, right, between pages, between different sections of pages. I think that would be really convenient and something that I was never able to do before with my notes.
Yeah, I think what you'll be able to do with Craft is replicate essentially what you do in MindNode, where you can actually not just have a tree of ideas, but you can connect between nodes with their own anchors, right?
Right. Yeah, that will absolutely be possible. And then I guess I will create my mind map again, because I like having notes. I like having structured notes, but visually speaking, I prefer the sense of progress that a mind map gives me, you know, like to be able to expand a section, to see all the branches, to see all the nodes. And then when I'm done closing the section, put in a little check mark next to it so that I know I'm finished. I guess I will be more efficient in organizing my notes because of Craft. I will be able to find more connections between topics, between ideas, again, because of Craft and because of the simplicity and speed when it comes to creating links and backlinks between pages. So like an example, if I notice like a particular detail, a particular design detail, in, say, I don't know, the share sheet in iOS 15, and I'm bringing up a stupid example, uses the same color as, I don't know, the dock. I will be able to create a connection between a note about the share sheet and a note about the dock, right? And those will be linked to each other. And that will allow me to see that connection and remember that connection, right? Which is something that I wasn't able to do before with Apple Notes. I will still create a mind map because, to me, visually speaking, for long writing projects, for massive writing projects, such as the iOS review, it is essential to be able to visualize the progress.
What's the threshold for you in a writing project using something like MindNode? I mean, I know you don't use it for your day-to-day, shorter reviews or link posts or something like that. You obviously absolutely use it for the iOS review. You use it for some of your longer form things, like some of the iPad stories you've done. But kind of where is that line?
Well, what's the expression? I know it when I see it.
Right.
It's basically that, like when something becomes so massive that it goes beyond the scope of a bunch of notes or an outline in my text editor, I know that it's time to, whip out MindNode and create a mind map.
Is it fair to say that it's something that you can't keep in your head all at once, basically?
It's something that, yes, I think that the threshold is, this is something that can no longer just exist in my head, that I need to visualize as a map, as like multiple chapters, multiple subsections. Like, for example, last year for my modular computer story, I didn't have to do it. 2 years ago, for my Beyond the Tablet story, I created a mind map because it was like this massive thing with multiple chapters, multiple sections and subsections of those sections. Like when you got that sort of deeply nested hierarchy in a story, that's when I need a map.
All right. That makes sense.
It's like you tell me, go to the supermarket in your neighborhood versus you need to go find this particular place in Rome. And at that point, I need a map.
Right.
And that's sort of the way that I think about it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's get beyond typing the words into various apps and talk about a few other types of things. One is dictionary apps, and
you tell me about this because I don't really use a dictionary, so I'm curious.
Okay.
Well, I use a dictionary in the sense that sometimes I need to look up words and I use a dictionary, but you seem to have a more involved setup here.
I do, and I don't. I guess I use a dictionary not for definitions so much. I do use it for that once in a while, but I use it more often for as a thesaurus. And so I'll use the thesaurus in the built-in Mac dictionary app, which I think is really good. And I think on iOS, one of the things that I like the best, the reason I like the Mac version that comes with the system so much is that the words are all linked together. So if you type in a word and you're like, I want something a little different than this, and you see a bunch of synonyms, you can click on any of them and see all the synonyms of that word. And you can just kind of work your way through this hierarchy until you find exactly what you're trying to express. Now, I like lookup on iOS a lot, but it doesn't have that. And that's like one of the few things I really wish it had was this ability to look at the similar words that it has in its definition and go straight to those words without going into search. The app that has that is Terminology, which is also by Greg Pierce. And Greg, I think that app just got a recent update for the recent size phones and that sort of thing. It doesn't get a lot of updates. I mean, it's a dictionary app. I don't think it probably needs to get updated as regularly as most apps, but it's really nice that way, and that you can work your way through trees of related words very easily and quickly to find what you're looking for. And that's, I kind of wish in a way that the design of lookup was combined with the utility of terminology. So I had kind of a nice hybrid of those two things, which is how I feel what I've got on the Mac. But yeah, I use the dictionary app on the Mac quite a bit, actually.
Interesting. Yeah, I need to look into terminology again. And John, you also use, totally changing the topic here, but you also use a grammar checking tool in addition to the dictionary.
I do, and this is like a subscription service called Grammarly.
Right. Okay, why is this better than have somebody else look at a story?
Well, because you can't always have someone look at another story for you because we're busy, right? And so I would say that we typically have each other look at each other's stories when it's a longer form thing, especially when it's like a review or something like that, less so for the day-to-day news or link posts. And so I like to have that extra backstop of Grammarly because the reality is I'm not very good at proofreading my own writing, and typos are likely to slip by. They still get through anyway, but Grammarly gets rid of an awful lot of the obvious ones. So I've gotten better at proofreading my own writing when I take my time and don't try to rush things. But Grammarly is always kind of my final check where I paste things in, and I've gotten to the point with that service now. It gives you a score for your writing, and I can tell by that score whether almost by the score I can tell whether the thing is ready to publish. Because if it's in the 90s, if it's 93, 95, maybe high 90s, then I know I got to go in and find the few commas that I maybe missed, that kind of thing, and I'm good to go. If it comes back and it's in like the low 80s or something, I think, well, there's probably something wrong here, because it doesn't just check for typos, it checks for sentences that are too long, sentences that are confusing, have too many clauses hanging off of them. It's got a lot of different things it checks, and I use it primarily for the things that are actual errors, like maybe I have the word "the" twice in a row, or I missed a comma, or I spelled something wrong, or I transposed letters, that kind of thing, that I absolutely always double check and make sure that I've gotten right. And it's really good at that. Once in a while it gets things wrong, and especially with some of the technical terminology that we use for tech products and things that have similar names to things in the real world, it can get confused. So you have to be careful. But I do think it does a really good job of backstopping your writing, especially when you don't have a chance for someone else to look at it. Now, it is kind of expensive. I forget, it goes on sale. It has in the past gone on sale a lot. Seems like it doesn't as much as it used to. I used to re-up every time that it went on sale because then it would just extend the contract out at a reasonable price. But it's pretty pricey. I think it's like $120 a year, I think, full price. But I've found it's worth it.
Interesting. Also something that I should consider, maybe. While we're on the topic of things you do that I do not, and this is not something that I want to do, well, I guess you used to, maybe you still do it, but not as much as before. I'm trying to describe this. Annotate by hand articles with good notes and the Apple Pencil,
Yes.
like a teacher in high school.
Yes. And I don't do this very often
Mm.
anymore. And I used to do it more. I think it was a holdover from more analog writing that I would do when I was a lawyer. And you would print up things. You'd print up something someone would send you, and then you would mark it up. I don't do it much anymore. I still do it though if I have a really long story and it's gotten. And this is something like the Mac OS review, and it's gotten to the point where I can almost not see the words anymore because I've gone over them so many times that it's very hard to see the forest for the trees anymore. So what I do is I create a PDF, pull it into GoodNotes, take out the Apple Pencil, and try to read it that way. Because if I do that, I can export it in the themes using IA Writer so that it looks mostly like it would on the site, and it's just a different perspective and a different way of looking at things that helps me find things that just need some additional work. Whether it's not usually things like typos at that stage. It's more like, does this make sense? Is there a missing thought? Is the order correct? Should I reorganize what I'm writing here? That kind of thing. It can definitely help with that. But I would say the times I do that particular thing in the course of a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year at this point. Very rare, but once in a while it does come in handy.
All right. Should we mention shortcuts? I think we should.
We should.
Because
We should. We both use it.
When it comes to writing, I do have a handful of shortcuts that I use basically every single time I put together an article. When I want to publish something on Mac Stories, I do so with a shortcut that lets me publish to WordPress. This has to be used to be a workflow, now a shortcut that I've used the most and most consistently. Like, it's basically been unchanged for the past 5 or 6 years. It's a simple shortcut that lets me post either a regular story or a linked post on the site. I have a shortcut to count the total number of words in a story by doing some fancy markdown to rich text conversion and then counting the words. I have a shortcut that, and this I do a lot for my longer stories and for the iOS review, that either takes multiple text files in a subdirectory or accepts input from the share sheet and creates multiple backups of that story in both iCloud and Dropbox. And I also have a variety of shortcuts for image uploads. Those are specific to Mac Stories and our new backend for image uploads and compression. So I do that a lot usually when I'm doing the screenshots for a story, I save it as the very last step in the editing process, and I put IA Writer and photos side by side, or it's either photos or files sometimes if I have those screenshots in files. And I run my shortcuts for framing images and uploading images, combining them, all kinds of, maybe creating image galleries for Mac Stories. But I do that in split view, and I just drop in the URL in the story and I'm done. So I don't ever need to use an online CDN web app or anything like that. I do it all from shortcuts.
Yeah, I guess for me, I don't publish to WordPress ever with I use
you do it manually?
Yeah, I just go into the web app. I just go in and paste in the title, then paste in the body and click off the options, and yeah, that's all I do. But I do use obviously the same image I guess composition shortcuts and uploading ones that you do, and of course a lot for the club. An awful lot of the pieces of how the club newsletter comes together is a collection of shortcuts that Federico made. I don't know, it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago now. I do want to ask you about this count words with markdown shortcut that you have, because IA Writer has a word count right built into it. Why don't you just use that?
Because sometimes I have, for example, a story that spans multiple text files.
Okay.
And I want to combine all of those together. And it's easier to do so with like shortcuts that access a directory as a bookmark and retrieve all of those text files and then put them all together and count all of the words.
That makes sense. I guess the only other thing I would mention that I do with images is because I work on a Mac more than you do, obviously. A lot of times, if I am working on my Mac on something that's maybe a review for an iOS app, I'll make those screenshots and do those frames and all of that on my iPhone or on my iPad. And then I will airdrop it off to my Mac and then upload it from there using our new web app for uploading images. And if it's a Mac screenshot, I use Pixelmator Pro because Pixelmator Pro does a terrific job of helping you, compose various images. So I use that as well. But I think that's about it. That's about it for me. How about you?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I've gone through all the things that I do. There's some new stuff on the horizon this year. Like I mentioned this before. I want to play more around with Taio, which is the new text editor with automation support. I want to see what happens to shortcuts, obviously, in 2021. If developers come out with some new and interesting actions compatible with shortcuts. But yeah, this is like my setup has been pretty much unchanged for the past few years. The big change, I think, is craft and the way that I'm putting together and linking together notes and research, everything all in one sort of. So that's the most interesting part that is going on in my writing workflow. And when it comes to the text editor, obviously I'm still using IA Writer, but I think the context of the apps surrounding it was interesting to do this episode. So yeah, Highlights was one of the apps that I started using in 2020. Craft at the end of 2020. I'm taking both of those with me in 2021, and let's see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be an interesting year. I've been enjoying Craft so far, but it'll be interesting once each of us is doing a very big project in it, a big writing project, because I don't think either of us have really done that yet. So stay tuned for more on that, I suppose, later this year. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode again, and that is Fitbod. Of course, you can find me and Federico over on macstories.net writing away. Federico is at Vitici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.